So we have to know who those people are, and we have to go after them, but we have to do more than that. On the one hand, we have to learn what's coming and preempt it, and not be afraid to preempt potential terrorist acts against us. But then we have to look to our own security and give ourselves the kind of reassurance that we deserve, that we're doing the things necessary so we have our children back to our schools, our government officials back in their offices, and these people are not able to stop a resilient, powerful, strong country as we are.
Mr. Shultz, you said we ought not be afraid to preempt it. Have we been afraid to preempt it?
It's hard to preempt. Well, we've done some in the past. It's hard to preempt because you have to know who it is you're going after very clearly and have the right kind of intelligence. But it only underlines the importance of strong intelligence, not only electronic intelligence and photography and so on, but we have to have a very capable human intelligence to know and be able to preempt these sorts of things.
Secretary Cohn, you were in office, if memory serves me correctly, when the Cole was attacked. Obviously, this is a much more horrific event. Did the Cole incident flash back in your mind?
It flashed back in my mind, but also the bombings in East Africa flashed even more vividly before me, because they were, again, nearly simultaneous explosions directed against innocent civilians. And to follow up on Secretary Shultz just mentioned, we indeed did gather together and vow to have the long-arm justice reach out and take those down who were responsible for it, but we also took preemptive action. That was the basis on our attack in Afghanistan, when we had intelligence that there was to be a gathering.
Well, we're obviously having a lot of crosstalk and a technical problem. We'll sort it out and we'll try and get our guests back. We mentioned a moment ago there were 50,000 people who come to work each day at the World Trade Center. There are literally tens of thousands more who come into the city, each of them affected. But the effect of this, we suspect, is much broader than that it'll affect everyone in the country. Former Secretary of State George Shultz says American life been changed. I know forever seems a bit farther than I want to go, but American life been changed today?
No. American life will pick up. We have to look to our security, obviously, and be careful about it, but we're not going to allow these terrible people to change our way of life. They just aren't going to be able to do it. We defend ourselves adequately. We will find out who they are. We will get rid of them, and we'll learn how to preempt these attacks. But we're not going to change our way of life because of these people. I reject that entirely.
And so we respond, and then people get on airplanes again with the same sense of security that they had before. People go to the Trade Center with the same sense of security they had before.
I'm afraid it'll be a while before they go to the Trade Center. But as far as the use of commercial aircraft are concerned, yes, I think we'll have our aircraft back in operation. We'll have to have tighten and be very careful as people get on these planes so that we feel secure that we've done everything possible to keep people off who obviously took over a plane. They did it very skillfully. The pilots apparently weren't able to put out any kind of an SOS, and they must have been able to fly the plane. So we're dealing with an organized group. They have to have a safe haven somewhere that allows them to do these things. So let's go after them.
Mr. Secretary, thanks for joining us today. Secretary of State, former Secretary of State George Shultz, James Baker, former Secretary of State as well, and Secretary of the Treasury, and William Cohn, former Senator from Maine and Secretary of Defense in the Clinton administration, all joining in and all offering similar messages that what happened today cannot be allowed to change the basic core of American life, and that the United States must hold accountable and responsible not simply those who carried out these actions in New York and in Washington, and perhaps another plane as well, the plane that crashed in Pittsburgh, but also any government that has turned a blind eye to terrorist groups, that has offered them safe haven or support, financial, physical support, whatever, that they must be held accountable as well. James Kallstrom, former FBI here in New York, joins us. He's in Delaware. Mr. Kallstrom, can you hear me?
I can hear you fine.
What are you hearing? Are you hearing things now? Do you have a network of people who are calling in, or that you're calling, who are telling you what they're finding out?
Well, I certainly have a network of friends, and they're busy doing their work, not calling me. The only people calling me right now are the news media.
Okay. What's going through your mind? What are the questions beyond the most obvious? Who did this? What is it that you want to know?
First off, just the immense tragedy of this event and the desire to save as many people as we can save in this terrible, terrible situation. Second thought is that, you know, since '93, with the bombing of the World Trade Center the first time, people that hate us and hate what we stand for and hate our way of life have demonstrated that over and over again. I don't have to go through all the different events, but we all know what they are. And today they brought that terrible hatred to the United States of America, and we as a country, as a nation, need to stand together. I agree totally with George Shultz, who I admire tremendously, that we need to go find out who these people are, and with respect to collateral damage, we need to not let this happen again. And I think this puts about 5 exclamation points on why we in this country need a sophisticated, dedicated, high morale team of intelligence agencies and law enforcement that work together. Not that if it was any better than it was the last 5 years, I'm not saying it wasn't good, but it needs to be the best and continue to be the best.
But you're suggesting it has not been good enough.
Well, in a free society, you know, it's virtually impossible to know everything about every bunch of cowards and crazy people that populate the world, unfortunately. But we need to get as close to that as possible without changing our way of life. And I think that exclamation point just hits home today, and we need to stop this. We need not to change our way of life. We need to find out who did this, and I'll tell you right now, that's a short list of people. And our government knows pretty much what that short list is. They're putting the final touches, I'm sure, and will over the course of the next few hours, next few days, and we need to do something about it.
Sir, thank you for your time today. Appreciate joining. We have shown you a number of times the video of this second plane that at 9:08 hit the Trade Center. We have, I believe, some still pictures of that plane as it moved. I'm seeing them for the first time with you, so bear with us. You can see that in the first shot, the plane approaching the Trade Center. And here in the second frame, you can see in the front, I believe what we saw there was the plumes of smoke and fire from the hit on the first building. The plane now visibly closer to the Trade Center building. It is just the most extraordinary and painful thing to look at, because you know what's happening. Mr. Kallstrom, are you able to see these pictures, by the way? Mr. Kallstrom?
Yes, I am.
Were you able to see those?
I was able to see that, yes.
As you watch that, as you've seen that, I hear the anger builds, doesn't it?
It does. It certainly does build. I mean, it's unbelievable. It's unbelievable.
I mean, we're trained in many ways, both of us, by profession, not to use words like unbelievable, and then you confront moments like this where, in fact, unbelievable is about the only word that seems to apply.
Yeah, I just can't, having lived through the tragedy of TWA Flight 800, which, as sad as that was, I mean, this is geometrically worse. And just thinking about the personal terror of all the people involved in this, the people on those planes. I'm sure there's teenagers and babies and adults and just normal people on those airplanes that suffered tremendous terrorism.
Yes, sir. It is hard to imagine what it must have been like on those 4 airplanes, because while the attacks on the buildings themselves happened quite quickly, these people in these airplanes were aware that something horrible was happening for perhaps an hour. The flight from Boston to New York, right around an hour, a little bit less. Clearly, they knew this was something horrible had come into their lives, and they knew it for a long time.
That's probably true. And think about the fact that people obviously took control of the plane and knew something about flying one of these sophisticated fly-by-wire airplanes. I don't know how much they knew. They knew enough, obviously, to crash it into the building. I can't imagine any American pilot crashing an airplane into one of these buildings.
Now, sir,
even with a gun to their head, they wouldn't do that.
I was thinking exactly the same thing, that it is unimaginable to me, at least, that any pilot, no matter the circumstance, would have followed that order, crashed that plane into this building or that building. I don't know what they would have done, how they'd have dealt with it, but it is unimaginable they would have followed that order.
So you've got people that not only are willing to give up their lives for just a horrendously, in my view, stupid, cowardly act, but are sophisticated enough to fly a modern jet plane.
It was described by Secretary of State Shultz, and I don't know if you heard it, as an act of war against the United States. Do you see this as an act of war?
I think it's clearly an act of war. I think it's, in many ways, it's a different time, but it's everything that Pearl Harbor was and more. It just puts an exclamation point next to this dangerous world we live in, and the inability to appease people that are this demented with rhetoric. It hasn't worked. It's not going to work. We can see what happened today. All peace-loving people of the world, all people that believe in democracy and freedom, need to stand against this. Any country that harbors or aids this type of activity anywhere in the world needs to declare which side they're on, and we need to seriously do something about this, and I believe we will.
Mr. Kellstrom, thank you for joining us. To Washington and our colleague, Judy Woodruff. Judy?
Aaron, again, listening to your conversation with James Kellstrom and the others, it's we can only begin to grasp the magnitude of what's happened here. And I keep thinking back to what your New York City Mayor, Rudy Giuliani, said about 30 minutes ago. He looked at the camera and he said, it's safe here in New York City, everything is safe, but I would just say, without contradicting the mayor at all, that for so many people watching these pictures, it's very hard to believe or to know what is safe after 4 commercial jetliners caused the deaths that we have seen today. We have right now, we want to show you some pictures, some conversations with people on the streets of New York City this morning about the time of the airplane crashes into the World Trade Center. Let's listen.
The actual airplane hitting the building. It was surreal. As we looked at it, we thought it was something out of a movie. It just didn't seem real. The airplane just came in at a tilt. We heard the scream of the plane, then a crack, 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 boom, 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 and the plane just disappeared. You didn't see the plane anymore, and and then you saw the blowout from the other side.
A lot of people equate this to something like Pearl Harbor. You were there. You saw this. Put yourself in perspective that this is nothing's ever happened like this.
Well, I now have images that will never leave my mind. As I'm walking up from, we walked down from downtown up to Grand Central here, and I just keep seeing that airplane hitting. I saw also prior to the second airplane hitting, while we were still standing there, I must have saw about 7 or 8 bodies flying through the air, coming from 80 floors up. Just they'd fall from the debris, and you just saw them cartwheeling down, bouncing off the building. It was devastating. I'm not an emotional person in the least. I actually felt tremendous emotion at that point, because I do have a lot of friends in both buildings. And I do know that last time, as I said, it took 2.5 hours for somebody on the 70th floor to get out of that building. It's absolutely devastating. I believe, being down there, was tens of thousands of people dead. That's what I believe at this point.
So you're not an emotional person, so you're
I'm not emotional in the least, and now I'm very emotional about this. I have feelings of revenge, but I sure hope that the government doesn't arbitrarily select an enemy and decide to, for political reasons, obliterate that enemy just for this. But I do hope they find the people that are responsible for this.
Shot in the back, shot. Joe, what do you do?
And fell and just hit and just blew out the plaza we were on.
It was complete dark. There is no light. So thank God somebody with little light came up, because we could not even see what's happening. We all, with dust and debris and.
How'd you get out?
Well, the firefighter, somebody with little light came eventually, and we were following him.
And go to.
What did you do?
The police officer told everybody to form a human chain, and we held on to each other, and he flashed the light, and he directed us to Building 5, and we went out Building 5.
Did you see people bleeding, and what did you see?
Oh, everybody could see. Do you want blood? Here's blood. Everybody's bleeding. People are laying all over the floor. It's horrible. And I was there the first time, and this is twice.
CNN producer Rose Arce on the streets of New York. She's joining us by telephone. Rose, can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Judy.
What are you seeing? Tell us where you are.
I am about 2 blocks north of where the World Trade Center used to be standing, and I'm surrounded by firefighters who are just watching helplessly. They've had to suspend their rescue operation, and they're just watching a burning hulk of building right now. The front part of the World Trade Center has completely sheared off, as well as many of the upper floors. And every few minutes you'll hear like a small sort of a rumbling sound, almost like an explosion sound, and another chunk of it will come flying down into the street, creating a situation where rescue personnel just have not been able to get close to this building now for over an hour.
Rose, how close are they to the building?
I'd say the closest people are probably about 2 blocks north of there, just in front of where I am. I spoke to a firefighter a few minutes ago that said that he had to stand there and watch helplessly as at least a dozen people leapt from the upper floors of this building during a fire.
Rose, when the mayor was asked this question at a news conference a little while ago, he said he wasn't able to answer, but given your vantage point, can you tell how large a perimeter, how many square blocks are we talking about that's been devastated?
Well, I'd say that at least, up to 4 blocks north, really 5 blocks north of the World Trade Center, there is debris on top of buildings. There are buildings that have been pierced by debris. The streets are covered with several inches of soot and literally pieces of people's desks. There's office supplies. Where I'm standing right now, I can see there's letters on the floor. There's one woman's resume. There's some insurance papers. Things that clearly came from inside that building.
And Rose, where again you are? How close to what's going on here?
I'm about I'd say about 2.5 blocks north of the World Trade Center.
And are you still seeing victims injured being taken away or walking away, or is that
no? Right now, there's absolutely nobody that's getting anywhere close to that building. There's just a huge and enormous pieces of debris just falling one right after the other. And as I said, firefighters a lot of them are just standing here helpless, wanting to go in and try to fight the fire, but just can't get any closer because of safety problems.
And Rose, is your sense that there are enough emergency personnel there once they can? I mean, give us a sense of how many emergency personnel you see.
There's an absolute small army of fire safety people. I mean, I even see Immigration and Naturalization Service officers, federal marshals. There are trucks from all over New York. I see license plates, New Jersey, people from upstate New York. There's just a small army of people here, but there's just really not a whole lot that they can do for whoever may be left right now, because it is just such a dangerous situation.
CNN producer Rose Arce, she's talking to us right now. She's a few blocks away from the World Trade Center, describing efforts by rescue personnel who just cannot get close because it is still a very dangerous situation. You heard her say large pieces of debris still coming down. And these pictures we're showing you, all of them taken earlier in the day since the first airplane hit the World Trade Center about 8:48 this morning. And again, these are those still pictures that Aaron first referred to a few minutes ago. Still pictures of a commercial jetliner. This was the second one to come in. This was the plane, the United Airlines Flight 175 that we now know has to be the one that Boeing 767 bound from Boston to Los Angeles. Instead, it ended up inside and going through incomprehensibly one of the towers of the World Trade Center. Just about a block and a half away here in Washington, a block and a half away from the White House, CNN senior White House correspondent John King. John, you were not traveling, of course, with President Bush, who went to Florida yesterday, but you have been talking to a number of people around the president who are trying to stay on top of what's happened.
Trying to stay on top of what has happened, Judy, despite the fact that from the ground up anyway, the White House complex, which you see behind me, the building itself and the old executive office building, which is home to a number of senior administration officials, a virtual ghost town, evacuated this morning. The president, as we have reported, is now at a military installation in the Midwest. The president, first from Florida, stopped at a military installation in Louisiana. He was briefed. Then there was talk that he would come back to Washington, and administration officials saying they believe that is politically very important to send a signal to get the president back to the White House as soon as possible. But the president instead stopped at a second military installation in Nebraska. We are told he is participating in a National Security Council meeting by telephone. Vice President Dick Cheney has been in the White House, underground in the White House Operations Center, the Situation Room, which is a fortified command and control structure, throughout the day with other national security officials, receiving information from around the country and directing U.S. operations from there. We do know on Air Force One en route from Louisiana to the Midwest, the president spoke to the mayor of New York and the governor of New York. He's been in constant contact with officials back here, including members of the congressional leadership, who also have been asked by their security to go to a secure bunker area built for just such a situation, a national security emergency in the United States. The leaders of Congress taken as well to a secure location. Again, the White House grounds were evacuated when all this was taking place this morning. From this perch up here, which you are familiar with from anchoring Inside Politics, you can still see smoke wafting up from the Pentagon and National Airport across the Potomac River, usually one of the nation's busiest, of course, now completely shut down as part of the security precautions being taken here. We are told there is a priority on trying to get the president back to the White House, but priority number one is the president's security. And I've spoken to several senior administration officials as well as some security sources who say at this moment they know of no specific additional threats, but of course they were caught so completely off guard this morning, extra precautions being taken because of the scope of these devastating terrorist attacks. Judy?
All right, John King at a location on top of an office building just a few blocks from the White House, as you can see, reporting on the scene there where every federal building in the city of Washington has been evacuated. Joining us now on the telephone, former Georgia United States Senator Sam Nunn. Senator Nunn, are you in Atlanta, New York?
Judy, I'm in Wilmington, Delaware.
All right. Senator, longtime leader of the Senate Armed Services Committee, someone who has followed military affairs in this country for so long. What are you thinking right now?
First, it was certainly a day of hate in terms of what was perpetrated by whoever did this, and second, a day of sorrow for the people who are the victims and their families. And it certainly was a cruel and heartless and monstrous type attack. I think it's very important that we are steadfast in this country. We always rise to the occasion and work together when we're in a crisis, and I think this qualifies for mustering the American will to remain calm and collected and determined and firm, but most of all, solidarity here at home with the President, following his lead with the governors, with mayors, with the people on the scene, the front lines, the firemen and the policemen and the medical personnel and the nurses and the doctors, people we take for granted every day, but God bless them, and we need to be with them and behind them and help them in every way we can. Certainly we need to learn lessons from this. We need to find out about the intelligence, find out why we didn't get some notification, whether we had information that we did not properly analyze, or whether
Senator,
all of those things come to mind.
Senator, I want to ask you about that, because there has to be many people out there watching who feel betrayed, who want to know why is it that something, how is it that something on this scale could be carried off when they thought the United States was the safest country on the earth?
Judy, I think that's a good question, and I think our intelligence people have to be asked those hard questions, and they will be. I think we also need to put it in perspective, though. We've had efforts against America for the last 20, 25 years, some of them almost of this magnitude in terms of the planning, and they've been warded off by law enforcement and intelligence. So we have to put it in somewhat perspective, and we have to also understand some of our other nations in the world have been under not exactly this kind of attack, but similar type terrorism for a long time, including Great Britain, including Israel and the Middle East, including Germany. So we have to understand that America is an open society, and we're vulnerable to this, and we need to do everything we can to tell the people of the world that we expect them to be solid with us, too, because we need world condemnation here. Certainly when we find out who did it, we need to retaliate, and we need to demand that the world stand solid with us in condemning any country that houses or supports terrorism.
All right, former United States Senator Sam Nunn, Democrat of Georgia, joining us on the telephone, longtime leader of the Senate Armed Services Committee and certainly a leader in U.S. military affairs. Speaking of military leaders, we have now joining us live from Little Rock, Arkansas, former NATO Commander General Wesley Clark. And General Clark, you and I talked a little bit earlier today about what's happened. I know you have sources. Have you learned any more about either? We've obviously been looking at pictures of the horrific evidence of what happened, but have you learned any more about suspicions, information, about what might have been behind this?
Well, actually, I know that there will be a great deal of effort underway to find out who could have contributed to this. And there are various groups who could have been part of it. These groups often change their names. They have interlocking memberships, and so it will take time to run this down. But I think it's clear now, with the hindsight of a few hours, that how well coordinated this attack was, that it was launched from multiple airports, that it picked aircraft that had the largest possible fuel loads to increase their explosive capacity, that the people who were involved knew how to take over aircraft and fly them into the targets. And clearly they had some idea of the symbols of American power that they wanted to strike. And so I think we've got to allow some time for our military to work through this. I am reassured in talking to people inside the Pentagon that the command and control system in there is totally intact. All of the men and women who were part of that command and control system are at their stations and have been throughout this. And so it's very smooth and very effective. I'm thinking about all those people who were in that part of the Pentagon that was struck by the aircraft. We know there are a number of men and women who served there who aren't accounted for, and presumably there are casualties and fatalities there. But the command and control functions are totally intact.
But General Clark, what do you say to Americans, and this is the same version of the question I just put to Senator Nunn, who would say, we thought we lived in the safest country on earth, and now we find out that places that we thought were invulnerable, the Pentagon of all places, one of the most secure locations in Washington, much less in the country, the Twin Towers of the Trade Center, a building that had already come under terrorist attack and had been under increased security, to know that these kinds of places, and we've been told, at least I'm informed that Senator Orrin Hatch has said to some of my colleagues at CNN, there was an indication that Camp David may have been a target of the jetliner that crashed in Pennsylvania. This is the sort of thing that makes people want to reevaluate everything.
Well, I've heard the same rumor about Camp David, but we know that for all of our unique power in the world today, the United States is also uniquely vulnerable. We've been targeted for years by a number of these groups, and many people have warned for some time that there's really no ultimate protection against terrorism, and particularly international terrorism. There's no telling how many of these efforts that are similar or perhaps lesser in scale have been broken up by the United States or by our allies, and yet this one has succeeded, and I know there'll be some hard questions asked. But Judy, one thing that comes through very clearly in this is that in an era where global communications are the way they are, and there's movement of people and ideas and communications, that it's not possible to have only one nation deal with the problem of international terrorism. Greater international cooperation and coordination is required, and certainly no state should be supporting and sponsoring the presence inside its borders or the activities out of its borders of international terrorists. And that's one very important message that comes from this terrible tragedy, and I'm sure our government will drive this home very strongly in all of the international fora. I was just on the phone with people in Europe, and as you probably know, NATO headquarters has responded by ordering the evacuation. Of course, by the North Atlantic Charter, an attack on one member of NATO is an attack on all of NATO. And how this will play itself out in coordination with our allies remains to be seen, but here's clearly an area where the United States desperately does need the support of all of our allies, and I'm sure we'll have that support as we deal with the consequences of this tragedy.
General Wesley Clark, a former NATO commander, joining us from Little Rock, Arkansas. General, thank you for joining us once again today.
Thank you, Judy. Thank you.
Aaron in New York City.
Judy, there was something absolutely chilling as General Clark walked through the planning that must have taken place. The planes that were picked, the reasons that those planes were selected is absolutely chilling. CNN's Mike Hanna in our bureau in Israel joins us now. Whenever something like this happens, I guess you look to the Middle East. Mike, what's the situation in Israel now?
Well, Aaron, in an area that has been racked by violence by nearly a year, all have been closely watching events as they've unfolded in the United States. There has been a blanket condemnation from all leaders in the region of the events that have taken place there, and commiseration about the extensive loss of life that has occurred. However, when news of the events started to filter through in Palestinian areas, there were sporadic incidents of celebration in the streets in the East Jerusalem and in various parts of the West Bank. Palestinians took to the streets in small groups, celebrating what they said was an attack against the United States. The United States, blamed by some Palestinians for its ongoing support, as it is seen, of Israel in this conflict, in this Middle Eastern conflict. However, while some Palestinians were taking to the streets in apparent celebration, one youth was quoted as saying, as he received sweets handed around in celebration, "This is a sweet from Osama bin Laden," he said. However, while this was happening, the Palestinian leadership itself was very quick to condemn the events in the strongest of terms.
First of all, I am offering my condolences, the condolences of the Palestinian people to the American President, President Bush, to his government, to the American people for this terrible act. We are completely shocked. Completely shocked. Unbelievable.
Condemnation and commiserations too from Israel in messages to the United States administration. Israel has banned all non-El Al flights coming into the country as a security precaution, and certainly the events in the U.S. being watched very, very closely from this region, Aaron.
Mike, just a couple of things briefly. One is it is hard, and I suspect for many of our viewers, to look at the tape of the celebration that you just showed us and contrast those scenes with what we have seen from here in New York and in Washington. The utter devastation, the fear on people's faces, the death and injuries that we know have taken place. The contrasting pictures are extraordinary. Is the Israeli military on a high state of alert now?
Yes, very much so. There is a high state of alert throughout this area. The context that one must view those demonstrations in, those celebrations as we're seen in Palestinian streets, is a context of an area in which violence has been ongoing for nearly 12 months. The context, too, that some Palestinians have criticized the United States sharply for what is seen as its support of Israel in this ongoing conflict. And certainly the Palestinian leadership has been very quick to disassociate itself from those images on the ground, making quite clear that it condemns in the strongest of terms the events in the United States. All radical Palestinian groups, too, have disassociated themselves and denied any responsibility for the United States attacks. Aaron?
Mike, thank you. CNN's Mike Hanna, our Jerusalem bureau chief, where it's about 11:15 in Israel, about 3:45 here in New York. Hospitals here continue to be inundated with the injured, the most serious of the injured being treated first in a classic triage operation. Maria Hinojosa is at St. Vincent Hospital. She joins us on the phone. Maria, what are you seeing and what are you hearing?
Well, Aaron, since about 10 o'clock this morning, there's been a steady stream of ambulances coming into St. Vincent's, which is the central hospital for the traumatized, where they're dealing with the trauma units here. Now, what we've seen, the most recent numbers now, there's 256 patients. 25 of them are in critical condition. 3 of them have passed away. And about 30 firefighters and police have also been treated. Just to give you an idea of the numbers, this hospital handled the World Trade Center bombing in 1993. There they saw a total of only 160 patients. They are now having well surpassed that by 100 patients, more or less, 256 patients now. Mayor Giuliani arrived here about 5 minutes ago. He went straight inside. We're expecting him to come out and address the media here. And essentially there's a sea of green. Office chairs have been draped with white sheets to be used instead of stretchers. Buses have been ferrying hundreds of volunteers who have come to donate blood. They've been taken to other locations. And just about 2 minutes ago, we saw another busload carrying doctors and nurses who have come off. Lots of doctors and nurses coming to St. Vincent's wanting to volunteer. People here saying that they're asking them to come later tonight, where they're expected to be receiving patients well into the night for the next 24 hours at least. Aaron?
Maria, thank you. A snapshot of what is going on in any number of hospitals here in the city of New York and in the New York region, in the counties surrounding New York. This is all being played out in very much the same way. Another snapshot, if you will. CNN producer Alec Mirren is in a car in New Jersey trying to make his way to us here in the city. Alec, can you hear me?
I can, Aaron.
Tell me what is out there right now. How far are you from Manhattan?
Well, I've been traveling from suburban Maryland today, trying to come up, like you said, to assist in the coverage. And it's eerie how these events are impacting travel all along the Northeast Corridor. As you know, a very busy commuter area. We went to the train station in Baltimore this morning. The trains have just been canceled. People were forming carpools to get where they needed to go. As I jumped in my car and headed north on Interstate 95 and then on to the New Jersey Turnpike, lots of signs. Serious problems, avoid New York. On the New Jersey Turnpike, I don't know if this is unprecedented, but it's certainly unusual. Everyone was funneled off of the Turnpike at exit 11, which is Perth Amboy. Ironically, as you get off there, you could see the cloud of smoke still billowing out of the World Trade Center. Lots of people have just pulled over to the side of the road and are sort of sitting there. Some have gotten binoculars from who knows where. I talked to a few of them. They said they didn't know where they were going to go because the turnpike was closed. I just got here to the train station because reports had been that perhaps train service was starting up again. In fact, it is starting leaving the city, and they made that announcement, which was greeted by
watch my back.
Smiles and quiet nods of the head for people who are clearly waiting for loved ones to come out of New York City. But there's still no service into New York City, and the island remains pretty much an island. I talked to Woodbridge.
Alec, let me stop you there. Thank you for the snapshot. Keep working your way here. We could use the help. Judy Woodruff in Washington. Judy, what do you got?
Aaron, joining us now, our congressional correspondent Kate Snow for an update on what some members of Congress have been doing. We know they've been evacuated from the Capitol building, but Kate, you've been learning about some of their assessment of what's happened. I'm sorry, we don't have that audio connection with Kate. I can report that sources are telling CNN's national security correspondent David Ensor that there are, quote, good indications that people with links to the Osama bin Laden organization are responsible for today's attacks. We can't do much better right now at identifying these sources, but again, they're saying good indications. And this is, again, no proof, but this is very much in line with what high-ranking people have been telling us throughout this day, all the way from former NATO commander Wesley Clark. General Wesley Clark told us hours ago, and then again just a few moments ago, we spoke with him just a few moments ago. He said that there are very few organizations that would have the sophistication, the financial resources, the organization, the network of contacts to carry out an attack this sophisticated, this organized, where you have planes hitting these key locations in New York City and Washington, the Pentagon, within just minutes of one another. People who could take over the cockpit of an airplane and presumably push the pilot aside. We can't imagine that any pilot would knowingly fly an airplane into the Pentagon or into any place where there were people. That some of these people with connections to the terrorist organizations must have been at the cockpit. Joining us now, and I believe he is in a studio, George Terwilliger, who has had a career of following the activities of intelligence organization, has become an expert on terrorist activities. I'm sorry, we're not going to go to George Terwilliger. We're going to go to White House spokeswoman, Counselor Karen Hughes in Omaha.
And I'm here to update you all on the activities of the federal government in response to this morning's attacks on our country. As you heard from President Bush a short time ago, the federal government is acting to help local communities with search and rescue and emergency management operations, to take all appropriate precautions to protect our citizens, and to identify those responsible for these despicable attacks on the American people. While some federal buildings have been evacuated for security reasons and to protect our workers, your federal government continues to function effectively. We have a federal emergency response plan, and at President Bush's direction, we are implementing it. We began to implement it immediately after the first attack in New York this morning. We contacted American forces and embassies throughout the world and placed them on high alert. The United States Secret Service immediately secured the President, the Vice President, and the Speaker of the House, and they are all safe. They have also secured members of the National Security Team, the President's Cabinet, and senior staff. As you know, President Bush was in Sarasota, Florida, when the first attack occurred this morning. Air Force One has now landed at Offutt Air Force Base in Omaha, Nebraska, and the President is in a secure location. He is in continuous communication with the Vice President and key members of his Cabinet and National Security Team. Vice President Cheney and our National Security Advisor, Condoleezza Rice, are in a secure facility at the White House. I have just come from there. The Secretary of Transportation and other members of our White House senior staff are gathered at a command center there, and we are coordinating with other branches of our federal government. The Secretary of Defense remains at the Pentagon, and the Secretary of State is en route back to Washington from his trip to South America. President Bush is conducting a meeting of the National Security Council as we speak. They are meeting President Bush from his location and other members from different locations in Washington and other locations. As many of you have been reporting, the Federal Aviation Administration ordered all airports closed, and all planes which were in the air were directed to land at the nearest airport. International flights were diverted to alternate locations outside of the United States. Transportation Secretary Mineta has directed the Federal Aviation Administration to suspend operations until at least noon tomorrow. So no airline flights will operate until at least then, and until the FAA announces that operations will be resumed. Secretary Mineta has also issued orders controlling the movement of all vessels in United States navigable waters. The Federal Emergency Management Agency has activated 8 urban search and rescue task forces in New York, and 4 of these highly trained teams are at work here in Washington at the Pentagon. Every federal agency has implemented continuity of operations plans to make sure the government continues to function effectively. While the markets closed today because of the situation in Manhattan, the United States financial system has continued to operate. Banks have been open all day. The Federal Reserve has operated regularly and continuously. The Department of Health and Human Services has mobilized medical personnel and supplies to provide help to local authorities who are working so diligently to respond and try to help the victims of these terrible attacks. President Bush has committed the full resources of our intelligence and law enforcement communities to identify and bring to swift justice those responsible for these despicable attacks. The Department of Justice is setting up a hotline for families who fear that their relatives may have been victims of one of these attacks, and we will be announcing that telephone number shortly. Our fellow citizens and our freedom came under attack today, and no one should doubt America's resolve. President Bush and all our country's leaders thank the many Americans who are helping with rescue and relief efforts. We ask our fellow Americans for your prayers for the victims, for their families, for the rescue workers, and for our country. Thank you all very much, and we will continue to update you as information is available and confirmed.
When will the President return to the White House?
Will he go back to Washington here? Will he address the nation? If Vice President
Presidential Counselor Karen Hughes in Washington, D.C. at the headquarters of the FBI talking to reporters, and very unusual, she did not take questions, which normally would be the case for someone speaking in a spokesperson's capacity. But what we heard from Ms. Hughes is that all appropriate precautions are being taken. She said the President is in a secure location, the Vice President, and is in continuous contact, she said, with Vice President Cheney. She mentioned again that Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld is at the Pentagon. Secretary of State Powell, she said, at an undisclosed location. She said she went through, ticked off a list of measures that have been taken to assure that the federal government of this country continues to operate. She said a plan was put in place after the first attack on the World Trade Center this morning, and she said it has been in operation ever since. In an effort to be reassuring, she said on high alert, the United States forces were put on high alert, American embassies abroad, the same thing. She said not just the President and the Vice President, but also when you think about the succession to the presidency, the Speaker of the House would be third in line after, or second in line after the Vice President. She said the Speaker of the House, Dennis Hastert, has also been put in a safe or taken to a safe but undisclosed location. CNN senior White House correspondent John King at a location since the White House was mainly evacuated about a block away. John.
Well, Judy, Karen Hughes working throughout the day in the White House Situation Room in the basement of the White House at a fortified structure.
A great deal during the day. It's going to last for a number of days. We told the President that we thought that the whole rescue effort would take a week or so or more. But the main focus right now, obviously, is on saving as many lives as possible. I think it's still possible for us to save a lot of the people that are there. They're not all there. All of our police and firefighters are not there. We have a lot of police and firefighters. Bernie, do you want to explain where the police and firefighters are?
No,
we don't. We do not, and we're not going to put one out until much later, after we get a better sense of the numbers we're talking about.
The police and the police deployment is, primary focus is down in southern Manhattan in the rescue effort, but we're tending to our policing needs all over the city. We, as the mayor said earlier, we're getting assistance from the governor and the National Guard. About 200 National Guardsmen about 2 hours, about an hour ago, I guess. There'll be another about 1,500 sometime this evening. They come in to help us. And we're going to continue on the rescue efforts, but policing will go on in the rest of the city as usual.
For other possible actions, how is that going?
Obviously, we're in a high state of alert. We're looking at other government buildings, securing those buildings, securing other areas in the city. Right now, our primary focus and our efforts are in southern Manhattan.
Just one more, please.
I don't think anybody. The mayor and I were there this morning. I was there when the second plane hit the building. I was right underneath the building. I don't think anybody would have imagined that one of those airliners would have hit the building like that. Nobody in their right mind would have thought that would happen. So, and in this circumstance, it was something we couldn't avoid. We couldn't have stopped, even if we tried.
Thank you. Thank you.
We've been listening to Mayor Rudy Giuliani, obviously fairly close to the site of where the rescue operations are underway in New York City, reassuring that every effort's being made to get as many people out and to hospitals as they possibly can. Now, back here in Washington, let's return to our senior White House correspondent, John King. John, and let's talk about what the White House is doing, and some of which we heard about from Karen Hughes, who's a counselor to the president just a minute ago.
Well, Judy, some of this involves security precautions, which is one of the reasons the president is not yet back in Washington. He is now in Nebraska at a military air base conducting a National Security Council meeting, although at the White House they are putting a priority to getting him back as soon as possible. They believe that picture of the president returning to the White House would send a powerful signal. You heard both Karen Hughes here in Washington, Mayor Giuliani just again in New York, trying to reassure the citizens that the government is at work despite these atrocities today. They very much want to get the president back. Now, from an operational standpoint, the Vice President and the National Security Advisor, Condoleezza Rice, are in the Situation Room in the basement of the White House. That is the command and control system used for natural disasters, used for terrorist attacks like this one, used in the case of major military operations. That has been up and running throughout the day. The senior staff at the White House operating out of that. Ms. Hughes, on the one hand, trying to send reassuring signals, saying the government was up and running, the financial systems were up and running. Yet on the other hand, she too noted the remarkable paralysis this event, these terrorist attacks, have caused in the United States. Commercial air systems shut down nationwide at least through noon tomorrow. Security officials still not confident enough to bring the president back to Washington. So Karen Hughes delivering a statement, bringing us up to date on the activities and the movements of the president and the vice president, at the same time saying the United States government still looking into who is responsible for this. And I know David Ensor is standing by with more information. White House officials saying their early indications are that they believe, and David may have more information, that these attacks are linked to the suspected terrorist Osama bin Laden. Judy?
All right, John, you are right. David Ensor, our national security correspondent here in the studio in Washington. David, I know you've been on the telephone. What have you been able to learn?
U.S. officials are saying that they now have new and specific information, and they say this information is good indications that people with links to Osama bin Laden may have been responsible for these attacks. I asked, is this new information that's come in since the attacks? Yes, it is. Is it specific in nature? Yes, it is. Now, they're not completely eliminating the possibility that the attacks could have come from somewhere else, not ruling out a Saddam Hussein-inspired attack or some kind of combination of Palestinian groups or some other combination, but good indications that people with links to bin Laden may have been behind the attack, and this is new and specific information, the officials say. They are also expressing a certain amount of what I think is best described as anger at the comments by the Afghan government, by the Taliban government, by Wakil Ahmed Mutawakel and Mullah Omar, the leaders over there who have commented today, in which they denied that Osama bin Laden has ever organized terrorism out of Afghan territory. One official calling that lies. Lies, lies, lies. And there's a certain amount of black humor also now setting in as, like other Americans, national security officials, intelligence officials, the first thing they felt when they saw what's happening and what we're looking at on our screen here was shock. But that is turning now to anger. And when I asked whether there were considerations being given to some sort of retaliation against targets in Afghanistan, one official said, "I wouldn't be planning your vacation there if I were you."
David Ensor, just quickly, when they describe this new and specific information, do you know enough about the kinds of sources or the kinds of the methods here that you could characterize where this information might be coming from or in what form?
Well, they are not saying anything specific about exactly what the nature of this information is, as you can expect, Judy. However, when I talk to officials about the kinds of information that they would be gathering now, they confirm that that information includes passenger lists of the aircraft that were downed, videotape at airports from cameras, from security cameras in the airports. In a few days, they will have cockpit recordings. And there's also a limited number of people who are suspected of belonging to terrorist groups who are known to be able to fly aircraft. And it looks as if at least some of the personnel involved in this plot must have been able to do that in order to carry off this set of attacks, Judy.
Absolutely chilling to hear you say that, David, that there are people in these organizations, and we now know it, who could fly commercial jetliners to do these horrible, unspeakable acts that have been committed today in the United States. And now, as we look at live pictures of New York City, where the smoke still billows from the location of the World Trade Center's buildings that were 100 stories high, now completely decimated. Smoke coming from those buildings 6 hours after the collapse of these twin towers. To Atlanta and to my colleague Joey Chin.
Judy, we want to bring our viewers up to date. Of course, it's just after the top of the hour, and many people are probably tuning in at the top of the hour trying to understand the events of the day. So we want to bring you up to date on what we know, what we've been able to learn throughout the course of the day's events. There were two airliners just about 18 minutes apart this morning, which crashed into the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center at separate times. Both planes apparently had been hijacked. One of them was an American Airlines flight. The other is believed to have been a United Airlines aircraft. Now, the buildings collapsed not long after the attacks, and as you see, the people in the streets below just were rained on with the debris from these collapsing buildings. There are tens of thousands of people in these buildings on any given day at the World Trade Center, but officials say they do not yet know how many people may have been killed, and they do not want to venture a guess until they know more, until they have more solid information about what's happening. Again, the effort still to control the fire at the World Trade Center. Now, about a half hour after the second attack in New York, an American Airlines jet crashed into the Pentagon building. You see it there. Again, the plane was believed to have been hijacked as well. The building has burned throughout the day as firefighters have worked, trying very hard to get the blaze under control. Parts of the Pentagon building, you see it there, have collapsed. The casualties there are expected to be high, but again, we don't have any firm numbers yet on that. About the same time, a fourth plane was hijacked this morning. This one was believed to be a United flight from Newark, New Jersey, bound for San Francisco, and then it crashed in western Pennsylvania, about 80 miles south-southeast of Pittsburgh. Again, CNN continuing to follow up on all fronts. We want to return now to New York, and from his rooftop vantage point, CNN's Aaron Brown. Aaron?
Joey, thank you. Shimon Peres, the Israeli foreign minister, has been active in Israeli government's for as long as most of us can remember and has witnessed more of these terrorist attacks than any of us should experience. He joins us now to talk about this one. Good evening, sir. Thank you for joining us.
Good evening. Thank you.
Before, sir, we get to any of the specific questions, let me just ask you first, if I may, for a reaction to what has taken place here.
Our heart is with America, and our heart is with the thousands of families that have lost their children, their brothers, mothers. For Israel, it's a day of mourning. We announced that tomorrow the whole nation will be mourning. And I am sure that as bitter and painful the event is, the only one that can save humanity from this terrible danger is the United States of America. It was not an attack only upon America, but an attack upon civilization, an attempt to introduce the rules of jungle in our life, not to permit people to fly freely, to walk safely, to be assured at the places they live. It is like a declaration of war or an introduction of a terrible arm, and we have to draw all the conclusions fully, uncompromisingly, and right away.
Sir, you have been a soldier, a leader of a country. You have been privy to some of the most detailed intelligence reports there are out there. Are you surprised by the sophistication that must have been at play to carry out these attacks?
It's a sophistication of the most evil kind. You know, only evil people can arrive to such a sophistication. And the measures must be radical as the evil itself. I think what should be done is to identify every country that hosts or supports terror and declare those countries as terrorist countries. I think there must be a call to all religious leaders, Christian, Muslim, Jewish, to condemn fully, without an excuse, all the suicidal bombers, suicidal persons, who in order to kill others, they kill themselves. It's against the basis of our life. It's against the gospels of every believer. And then again, we have to organize ourselves globally, because we are going over from a world of enemies, where you have had armies to face them, to a world of global dangers that we don't have yet neither a strategy nor an army to stop it. We have to get ourselves organized properly and fully and immediately.
Mr. Foreign Minister, I hope you'll answer this. Let me ask it anyway. Did the government of Israel have any intelligence prior, any indications prior that something like this might happen?
Not specifically. We have had warnings, and there are all the time warnings. But we know, and all of us are aware of some of the addresses from where terror can origin. But anyway, I don't have any specific information, and I wouldn't like to blame anybody without full knowledge.
I understand that, and let me then, just for the record, ask the logical follow-up, which is, since the attacks themselves, has Israeli intelligence picked up any information that suggests who might be involved in this?
Any information we shall have, we shall hand over immediately to our American friends. And we also send right now, a plane with our rescue team, which is already on the way. Whatever we shall be able to do, or we can do, in order to be of help, we shall do it full-heartedly, without any reservations. Permit me to say that today each of us feels American, like an American, with all the seriousness, all the pains, and all the determination.
Sir, do you have any doubt in your mind that the root of this attack on the United States today, the root of it took place in the Middle East, that the events in the Middle East, the organizations in the Middle East Do you believe that to be the case?
I think we have to bring an end to the conflict in the Middle East, but you know there were already acts of terror in the United States disconnected from the Middle East, and there are in many other places the same story. We have to put an end to terror because it's a danger to every person and every country, no matter where it is. So the reasons are important, but the attraction to use terror in order to kill, in order to threaten, is existing everywhere. It's not connected to a specific case or specific place.
Sir, thank you. Shimon Peres, the Israeli foreign minister, a long time Israeli leader in any number of governments, joining us from Jerusalem tonight, where it is a little bit after 11 o'clock, about 10 minutes after 11. Thank you, sir, for joining us. We are getting information now that one of the other buildings, Building 7 in the World Trade Center complex, is on fire and has either collapsed or is collapsing. And you, to be honest, can see these pictures a little bit more clearly than I. But building number 7, one of the buildings in this very large complex of buildings that is the Trade Center, there were, and that is the right way to put it, there were the 2 towers, but then there are a number of support buildings around it, retail spaces, restaurants, office space, garages. The trains come in from New Jersey, bringing commuters, taking commuters back, come into the complex that is the World Trade Center. And now we are told that there's a fire there, and that building may collapse as well, as you can see. We can see, as we look now back downtown, we can see the billowing smoke. It is extraordinary to us, I guess, is how long this scene has gone on. The smoke has not cleared at all. It has not lightened at all. There was that horrific moment when the towers collapsed. And then we've been in this sort of situation ever since, as the fires continue to burn. Rose Arce, one of our producers who has been slowly and diligently making her way to the building, described the fires that she saw in the area of the towers themselves. And clearly those fires continue to burn at about 4:15 Eastern Daylight Time today, in an unbelievable and awful scene in New York. Judy?
Aaron, for those of us who don't know that area of Lower Manhattan, you are explaining something that is important, because I think the belief had been that there were just the 2 towers, but you're now telling us that there are several other buildings that make up the complex of buildings. And as Aaron is just saying, and we're hearing for the first time, one of these support buildings is on the verge of collapse, if it has not already collapsed. It looks to me, as it may to Aaron as well, with these live pictures, that smoke is so black that it may be the result of a fresh part of this terrible disaster. But it is only speculation at this point. We evidently don't have anyone on the phone down there that we can get to right this moment. But of course, when we do, we will tell you what is going on. We do know that every effort is being made by New York emergency authorities to get people out, but you also heard our producer Rose Arce say not too long ago that even the emergency personnel cannot get close because debris is falling at a steady rate within a 2-block radius around the Trade Center, and even their most heartfelt efforts to get in there and rescue people, they just can't do it because the risk is too great. We're going to continue to watch this horrific scene in New York City as we bring you up to date on what has been happening here in Washington. The Congress would have been in session today. In fact, it was gaveled to order this morning. At least that's my understanding. But members of Congress, after these buildings were hit, were quickly evacuated. And some of them have been gathering. There was report not too long ago that at 6 o'clock today Eastern Time that there would be a conference call of the congressional leadership to assess the catastrophe of today and to consider when the United States Congress should meet again. As of now, the Capitol was largely evacuated. CNN's Kate Snow is at a location near the Capitol, and she's been talking constantly to members and to members of the staff. Kate, what are you learning?
Judy, we are still under a lockdown at the Capitol. We've been told that Senator Lott and Senator Daschle would like to call the Senate back into session this afternoon. They would like to do that. Whether that's going to be a possibility is unclear at this point. Joining me here a couple of blocks away from the Capitol is Senator Bob Graham, Democrat from Florida and the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee. You hold a position where you are in the know, Senator. Tell us, what do you know at this point about the events that have transpired today? Have you been briefed yet?
Kate, we're about to have a briefing. The head of the CIA has been briefing the cabinet and the other key officials to the president this afternoon, and he's going to be talking to members of Congress on the intelligence committees and leadership shortly.
It's been reported, our David Ensor has reported, that there are strong indications that this could be linked to Osama bin Laden. Do you personally believe that that could be the case?
Kate, I think it's premature to start naming a prime suspect. If you'll recall, after the Oklahoma City bombing, there was an early identification of an Arab group that had done it. It turned out to be false. Let's withhold until we get a little more information. My own sense is that there are not very many groups around the world who have the capability of planning, coordinating, and executing a terrorist attack of this sophistication.
You are constantly being briefed by the FBI, by the CIA, by the National Security Agency. You are one of the senators that